Yeah. I lived in London in 2010 when the US and England were in the same group like we were last time,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which
Oh,
was
wait,
a delight.
when we played each other 1-1, and Pickford let the ball go, like, through his legs or something, didn't he? It was
Something like
sort
that.
of
Yeah.
bobbled
My
through his
my
hands,
my
yeah.
favorite part of that whole game, even though I was in London, the New York Post paper front page headline the
I know
next
it is.
day.
What, US wins 1-1?
That's the one.
Hey, IT changemakers, and welcome to the DEX Show with Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hi, change makers. Welcome back to the DEX Show. Look, I want to begin by thanking everybody who last week joined us for our first ever AMA on the new Nextthink subreddit with show regular and favorite Jeffrey Wright. It was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it, and Jeff was just, as ever, the perfect guest, the perfect interlocutor for so many people who pitched in. And actually, the resulting conversation is sufficiently entertaining to be worth a look in hindsight, even if you weren't able to join live. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes so you can click over. And if you haven't heard of the subreddit, or you haven't had a chance to give us a follow yet over there, please follow that link and do so. We'd love to have you as a part of that community, as we love to have you as a part of this community. And speaking of this community, it's always a pleasure to welcome a guest back. I'm pretty sure this gentleman is here for the second time.
True.
He is, yeah, I've got it right. Excellent, excellent, Phil. He is Phil Kirschner, and he's got Phil. I would describe your specialism and why we love to talk to you. You have a phrase, right, which is, I think, very American. It's like the intersection of HR, IT, and real estate. But you
It
just mean you mean the real world. You mean the brick and mortar. The
Yes.
the workplace per se. You
Per
might
se.
say
Yes. The
per
workplace
se.
and all of its follies.
But you go, as we're going to see, your thought goes beyond those confines as well. Um, but you're founder of PK Consulting, and if there's a delighted to have you back, and if there's anything I haven't said, and there surely has been, there surely is. Please add to your introduction and introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really nice to be back. It was almost 2 years ago now. I think
Almost
it was
2 years.
here when
That's
I
right.
had just left McKinsey, where it was my last like real role. So there I was sat between the real estate and people practices as an expert, come by way of the workplace strategy world. So think a lot about the built environment, even though I'm not an architect or designer. My background is actually in technology, which may be relevant to some of the AI parts of the conversation today. And maybe the other thing is what is different for me this time, being an independent consultant versus the last time I did it before I joined McKinsey, after having left WeWork, which was wild, is that I have a newsletter now called The Work Line. The tagline for which specifically is helping people lead across the lines of modern work, because I think the answers to many of the questions today come in the margins in between our traditional silos like
Yeah,
HR and IT and wherever the heck you put real estate or communications or everybody else.
100%. And yes, you are, uniquely your experience leaves you uniquely suited to occupy this intersection, right? And as
I
I'm
hope
sure it's
so,
going to.
if not recklessly candid about my feelings about it.
That's all right. That's all right. That's good. So, yeah, almost 2 years ago, and when it's a little nearer than I thought, actually, because I felt like when we last spoke, it was still the aftermath of the pandemic, and I guess that's true to some degree in 2024, right? But looking back now at the 2020s, per se, again, just more broadly, what do you think we've got wrong and right so far this decade in our reactions to events and our expectations of the consequences of those events which have defined the decade so far in terms of the
Mm.
workplace?
Yeah, what did we get wrong and right? So what did we get wrong? And depends, I guess, who the we is, right? But if you generalize, I think one of the core things that people may have gotten wrong, especially in the early 2020, still feeling the sting of COVID time, was that hybrid and remote was the first and only ever definition of what future of work is. Like, this is it. guys, we're here. The big change is here. And maybe we're not paying attention prior to March of 2020 about the things that were being defined by the thought leaders and consultants out there as potential future of work challenges. One of which being automation, and another one being, let's just call it like more fluid workforces, contractors, gig workers, consultants, all that. And one of those two is now very present in the form of automation and AI. The other one is lingering in the background and advancing slowly. But I guess that's the maybe it was the one risk. Leaders who think this is the thing right now, and there were no other things before, they might not be other things next. And when we finish this, when we're done dealing with the hybrid and remote thing, that we will move on. And even if another thing comes our way later, we will not have to tackle or wrestle with that previous era of what is future of work. So that's probably the biggest concern, that all of these trends are not being taken together. And a lot of clients that I talk to aren't trying to stitch the thread between them to realize what may become a continual like consumer orientation and lack of predictability for our workday, to think a little more holistically about the experience that we have to create going forward.
And, unembarrassed to have in part reached out to you because since we last spoke, AI has entered the picture pretty conclusively, explosively.
Indeed.
And you've written very very brilliantly on its impact, as I say, in a broader sense than just what it means for the workplace, although that is a dimension of its influence and impact we're fascinated to ask you about. So what changes have you already observed, not just in the technology itself, but in how organizations are consequently operating, how work itself is getting done, and how people are now planning, and how organizations are now planning for for the future in that intersection that we described at the top of the convo?
Yeah, look, so AI, or generative AI, I'll say specifically, right? AI is not new. This version of AI is new, or new to the mass market anyway, is similar to the last kind of wave of major change with hybrid and remote, in that it is a resistible change. If you tell someone, I want you to sit here, or I want you to go there, even if you say, if you don't do it, I'd say I'm going to fire you and you've got to do this and that, or you won't be promoted. Like, if you're the most draconian about it, that still doesn't necessarily mean that the person's going to do it. Or if they do, they might kind of phone in the effort. It's not the same as an organizational change. Like, oh, we've married two departments now that were never together before.
Right.
Some employee may not like the change, but they can't just sit on their hands and pretend it didn't happen. Like, congratulations, you work for Bob now. That's done before you ever found out.
Yeah.
But telling someone, I want you to behave differently than you did yesterday, or that you want to, makes it a resistible change. So I see similarities in the mandate. And to kind of answer your question, there's a few ways that I think organizations are approaching AI transformation. One is, oh no, everybody else is doing it, and we're in an economic moment where I'm being asked to do less, or do more with less. So go, 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 go. Like, yeah, use AI. Please use AI. Please do it all the time. You all have to do it. And not only does that create an environment where people who are not sort of trained properly and change management programs are not executed properly, who may explicitly or just sort of passively resist the change and not do it, or do it at the bare minimum level, you get barely anything. Maybe the employee gets a couple hours of their time back, but the organization does not benefit in any way. Then there's organizations that are leaning maybe on the other side, very, very hard into the power of these technologies, much like they might have in past digital transformations and RPA, kind of process automation, shop floor efficiency logic, right? Putting AI and spending lots of money with consultants and implementation specialists at the business of the business end. We make widgets, so we're putting all the horsepower that we can into that widget making machine, which in truth, for a large organization, only a small percentage of the actual employees might interact with on a day-to-day basis. And then they're ignoring the general knowledge worker set, accounting and marketing and operations and everyone else who doesn't make the widgets but supports the company, and can leave them out, unfortunately, in terms of AI fluency, training, adoption. And the most interesting organizations, maybe in the middle, are the ones who are recognizing this is not just an opportunity to help individual workers write more emails or write them faster, but a chance to tease apart and break and destroy every legacy assumption that we have about how the work has to happen. Because when allowed to do what it can do, these generative AI tools, and I love this phrasing I saw in a newsletter a couple days ago, it's like something like it's like hydrochloric acid for organizational boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just bleeds across, right, the lines of people and processes that are needed to make out like business outcomes. So if you lean into it and you're willing to prioritize the redesign of work, give teams not only the training, but the change support and embedded, call it forward deployed engineers or whatever you want, people who can understand and think in an unbiased way, how might this work be doable now in a way that was not doable yesterday? Giving these tools with the social scaffolding for the employees to go along on the ride, because it's really hard to avoid all the news articles about people being laid off supposedly because of AI. So you're asking them to implement something that is fearful for the security of their job at the same time.
Let's come back to this in just a minute, Phil. Very, very interesting couple of things you've raised there. But let's think about the what we decided at the top of a discussion, the workplace per se, and its impact on currents of like hybrid work. Do you think Gen AI reinforces the case for hybrid work, undermines it, or fundamentally changes the conversation altogether? Is that another silo that's starting to disintegrate?
Yeah, I think two things maybe. One, the companies that are having the most success, I think, with, let's just call it agentic or like AI assistant based augmented work, not outright replacing people, but all of us having our little agent on our shoulder. The ones who are having the easiest time at that are the ones who conveniently also have the most, not necessarily hybrid friendly work practices, but remote friendly work practices,
Okay.
which has a lot to do with documentation and asynchronous work and consistent ways of working. Because if you and I are pretty consistent with the kinds of channels that we use for certain kinds of information or project tracking, and if a company has a pretty good, call it handbook or playbook for who is who and what is what and what's important today and what we do and don't do, or registers of major decisions that were made, anything kind of written down, which is the hallmark of the most successful fully remote organizations. You layer AI on top of that and you get real supercharged work, because it knows where to look, it knows what the decisions are, knows who does what, it knows how to help. So companies that went hybrid, but really defined it as you don't have to be here all the time. We would prefer if you were, but you don't have to. Maybe we upgrade the office a little bit to support that, but like rarely did the more difficult work of making it easier for people to not be together.
Does that make
sense?
Say that again. No, who rarely did the difficult work of making. Go on. You have to explain that last one again.
It's both things, right? So if I'm a company where we used to be in all the time,
yes,
and which was never really all the time, but it was most of the time, and now I've conceded to say, not all of you wanted to be here all the time. Your commute is really long. Our office is okay.
Yeah.
So I will allow you to not be here some of the time.
Sure.
It's a concession.
Yeah.
And they are not also saying, I am going to make it easier for us to do our work and for work to continue and the company to continue growing and being successful when we are not here. I'm going to put in my effort into
Got it.
making you want to be here and trying to convince you that there are benefits of when you are here, or make the office nicer when you are here. I
Yes.
am not inclined to continue investing in the way work happens completely independently of where you happen to be at any moment.
Yes. Okay.
And very few companies, I think, have taken that like remote first stance where they do the work on the work and then continue to think about the built environment too.
Mhm.
Right? So the work has to come first because the bar is very low for me to not go in right now. Weather, kids, contractors, whatever. So that's how they related to sort of hybrid one. But then two, we were already saying like the office is better when we are together, but many people were still coming in to do individual work. And now these generative AI tools are like further chipping away the things that felt kind of together, but were in truth very individually oriented, and are really amplifying that like we should be together for things that are truly human, which means like hands off keyboards. I want my agent in the background doing the BAU work. I want to wake up to very minimal pings and nudges that I have to do certain things and push things along. And uh, that, it's going to raise the bar for what will make me want to come to be with someone, and therefore raise the bar what that environment will be like to support us when we're there.
I sense a parallel between your concept of, was it resistible change,
Yeah.
as it's kind of and the way companies have managed that issue of resistible change with regards to style of work or place of work, with maybe the approach to facilitating AI transformation in their organizations. What are those parallels, and where do they overlap and where don't they?
Well, look, change is hard,
Yeah.
and organizations are notoriously bad at change management, like have been forever. When I was at McKinsey and change leadership sessions, there's a slide that I can picture that a colleague used to use about, close to two-thirds of changes fail to achieve their objectives. How long has that statistic been true? And it's like decades, basically. So we haven't gotten any better at this. And that was when we were thinking about change management in a more traditional sense of go from point A to point B.
Mhm.
Now it's more of a change mindset. Like, I need you to be bulletproof to uncertainty. And at all times, understanding the reason we are undertaking various changes, and being more truthful with people about the very definition of the change that we're undertaking. At the very least, is this something that like we've elected to do ourselves? Is this something that we have to do because someone or something told us that we have to do? Or like if we don't do it, there will be a problem. And in particular because of COVID, I think like all the masks came off for executives, right? In deep pandemic time. Like my grandma was not okay, your grandma was not okay. We're all human right now. And so employees saw what actual authenticity and transparency looked like in many organizations. And so when the mask went back on, and now it's like, oh, economically, the power is very much with the employer. And you say you're laying us off because of AI, or you say I have to come back to the office because it's better for me. And the kind of, the BS radar goes up very quickly. We're like,
Mm.
that doesn't track with what I'm feeling. And you have not given me any evidence to suggest that I should behave a certain way because of a good reason. And we sense the inauthenticity. There's lower trust in organizations that you're seeing from organizations like Adeline with their trust barometer every year. And that makes it harder to define and establish kind of the terms of the change before you jump to what is normally defined as change management, which is communications. And if you look still at most change management roles that are posted that I see anyway, they're very communication oriented. Tell the employees what we want to tell them and what we want them to be happy about that we're doing, not spend more time upstream on proactively identifying what might be resistance issues, being honest with the definition, establishing a clear North Star vision, building a coalition amongst leadership for their conviction that change, and critically getting them to behave in a way that models this new future. And
Mm.
just like with hybrid, you tell me I have to come in, but the boss doesn't or lives farther away, or you hired an executive who's remote when you told us we don't do remote anymore. It's the same feeling saying, like, you're telling me I have to be using all these AI tools all the time. And yet I keep going to these meetings that feel like they're being run the old way by people who aren't using these tools and have not themselves changed how they are working. So I resist.
So the hybrid removes the old definition of place. AI removes the old definition of style or silo.
Yeah,
What?
and a job. It is really attacking what the word job means, and that's scary for sure.
Yeah, unpack that and where the destination should be then organizationally for people who work in places. What do future jobs look like if the very notion of the job is under threat, and why is it important to get there? How do we get there soundly?
I wish I knew the answer to this one. My suspicion is we're grinding towards greater clarity on roles and greater focus on outcomes.
Mm.
This is what has to be delivered. This is what I will pay you for. And it's the same, it sort of connects to like skills based hiring instead of, like, oh, you went to Harvard. Awesome. Now you're seeing more and more companies being like, I'm less concerned that you went to Harvard and more like, can you do this and this and this? And the AI tools themselves may make it easier to assess people for particular skills in the moment. I suspect we will also see a greater kind of dissolution of the team and hierarchy structure internally, and more likely that employees will be gigging around kind of project to project to project, and seeing sort of two kinds of roles emerge. One, either people who are contributing to the effort, like, and there may be many more of them, like flatter structures and dynamic teams. And hey, we got a contractor here and a person here. And sometimes we go in and sometimes we don't. We got a bunch of agents that have been spun up to help us, and that's cool. And then one person who is taking the accountability for the outcome. It's the Hollywood model a little bit, some people say, right? Like a bunch of people get together, we're going to make a movie. Someone's the producer. They get the bag of money, or their job is to get the money, and their job is to make more of it than they needed to make the money movie in the beginning. And then they go, they get one person who's good at casting and one person who's good at makeup, and like those people go find other teams, and they're largely contract and vendor, right? The whole thing comes together as a company for one moment to make one thing, and then poof, gone.
Mm.
And if it worked well, like you've got a higher chance of coming back or benefiting financially from that. If it didn't work well, you're gonna have a harder time finding someone who's gonna want you to do that next thing, right?
Yeah.
Which makes it more greater inequity, right? People who are really good will make a ton of money, and people who are not may struggle, at least in like more traditional roles.
Yeah. The concept a few years ago was called the democratization of work, right? And I guess it's the acceleration of that trend.
Yeah. Me also, like someone here in the US or in the UK may moan like, oh, I'm struggling to find a role. But is it good that someone in a country that may have struggled before, but whose, let's say, English is pretty good and technical skills are pretty good and can compete in a global scale and make their skills marketable and be visible on tools like a GitHub, right? Like external transparency. Like, this is me. Look, I contribute. I'm here. There's trust in this system that they may win and someone else is going to lose. And that's hard. Most of the complaints come from the people who have had it pretty good, right? When you say democratization.
Yes, 100%. Listen, this brings us down to sort of the implementation of organizational change, right? Well, I thought that's an excellent definition, by the way. And one of the things that caught our eye was your recent article, Leaders Can't Break Their Own Silos. And you mentioned this
Mm.
notion of zero-based organizational imagination, which looks even madder now I read my notes than when I first read it. So maybe break down what that is. I mean, that's like a core change management precept, though, isn't it? And what does it mean when it comes to AI transformation specifically?
Yeah. So, like, simply, like, I have for a while, at least as long as I've been writing my newsletter, been anchoring on interesting organizational changes that seem to blur boundaries. And we get, even at the executive level, maybe the first splashy one was when Moderna merged HR and IT together with all of this change in face. We're seeing a lot more of that, kind of HR and IT, AI and HR transformation officers like being merged because of the nature of the beast. And I've said, like, it's difficult to break the silos, and had been thinking more at the 2 and 3 and 4 people down from the executive maybe level who are really like hands-on fighting the battle for employee experience. And maybe had been thinking, gosh, this is really difficult at the executive level, but it wasn't until Deloitte put out their kind of 2026 Human Capital Trends report, which covers a wide range of topics, but had this a whole chapter dedicated to the fact that the kind of the traditional was called corporate functions, HR, IT, operations, risk, finance, where I should say real estate is not called out or mentioned for reasons we can maybe go into. But the G&A, the shared services functions, like maybe due for a reboot. And it leaned on a principle that I hadn't really heard invoked in a long time since I was a practitioner at Credit Suisse a long time ago, which is this construct of running the company and changing the company, run the business, change the business, and saying maybe we're headed towards a world where a lot of the keep the lights on stuff that is functionally very similar across some of those organizations, like maybe should be coming together in a different way. And we break out really the strategic change. Strategic finance is very different than strategic IT. But the running of finance and the running of IT, especially with more agentic support and different staffing models, like maybe more similar, just musing that this is perhaps the direction that we have to challenge the actual silos. And it felt so real to me, in part because of the lines in there about this is necessarily going to be hard because now the person who's afraid of their job is not Mary in accounting who's being told, oh no, my spreadsheets can be done by Copilot now, and I don't have to do that. That's scary for me. But now it's maybe it's the CFO or the CHRO. Like, you're telling me I should move 20% of my organization out or more to someone else? What does that do for me? Or seeing some executives in the case of Walmart and Coca-Cola, I think recently both had CEOs sort of transitioning out, invoking this moment, saying we're not necessarily the best person to lead through this speed and complexity of AI powered change. So maybe from the top, you're seeing a little bit of people going, am I the right person? And from the bottom, workers already being afraid of like, what does AI mean for me? But to challenge the silos means you need like N-1, N-2 executive leader who's willing to go, let's just pretend for a moment that my org didn't exist. And we took all the component pieces, we put them back together differently because of similarity in how they work or how agents can support them. And then let's see what's left. And where do I have that role? And that's really scary, more scary for them, maybe. Because you're in your career, you're more successful, financially. And what does that mean? You're like, wait, you're taking half of my responsibility away, or you're suggesting that half of them go somewhere else. And what does that mean? And how do you get them to feel okay about that?
So, employee experience has been a big theme of yours for a long time, Phil, right? And arguably the core of a lot, maybe, of all of your
Yeah.
writing. So, is that what employee experience becomes in this era of change? How do people come to feel okay about everything that's happening to them?
Ooh, that's a good. Yeah, I wouldn't know if that's employee experience or maybe just broader psychological safety, but
Sure.
employee experience certainly I think is due also for not a reboot, but a reimagination,
Yeah.
consistent with the sort of greater accountability for projects and change. And I do think that organizations will put more and more power to the edge a little bit instead of the center over time, or at least the ones that need to be moving quicker and more agile, more responsive, more iterative, which means that if I run a group, I'm ultimately responsible for my outcome. So in theory, or maybe I'm more accountable and benefiting from the outcomes that I'm driving than I ever was. So now, me as a business unit leader or project leader, I should, in theory, be more attuned to the choices that I am making about day-to-day actions, rhythms, and journeys for the people in my kind of area,
Mm,
and how those choices and experiences are affecting the outcome.
mm,
So it's a little less of cupcakes and confetti
mm,
employee experience, and more about trying to connect day-to-day behaviors to real outcomes. So when I used to work with the McKinsey, we call this applying like shop floor logic, the factory floor logic, to knowledge work for the first time, because maybe it's possible because of the way we can look at data signals. But to do that, I think is going to require a centralization of the teams and the people who are best positioned to measure and advise on those choices around employee experiences, not necessarily to own it, but to make it clear in an unbiased fashion to the people doing the work, like what matters. And that all stems from the fact that I often see if employee experience is owned by, let's say, an HR function, and you ask them about the things that influence the employee experience, 9 times out of 10, they will not invoke anything technical or spatial.
right.
It's all HR benefit policy, engagement survey, leadership development, which is important, but it is not the only thing that makes employees either, their change their behavior to be better for themselves in the business, or like working there to begin with. So that's why I think pulling those things out, which is a small example of the silo busting and getting it out of the way of the executives who are biased to the outcome, will be better for groups that are trying to understand the impact of the choices that they're making.
And when we had our last discussion, that the increasing gray area between the what you just said, the technical and the spatial, was I think our main
I think
topic
so,
of
yeah.
conversation. Um, we talk about, we call the former digital employee experience here, right? Um, and what do you think the implications are for that concept as employees increasingly interact not only with apps and devices, but with AI agents and assistants? And
Yeah, even more important, right? We're just, especially because the introduction of assistants and like vibe coding tools is making it even easier for employees to take a consumer orientation towards work.
Mhm.
Oh, I don't like that app anymore. And like you're saying, oh, our portal for this, that, and the other thing is really great. Like, I don't care. I don't want to go to your portal. I want my personal co-pilot to go get the information for me and help me. So I'm expecting like extreme interoperability and extreme sort of service mindset to me in being able to stitch together the ecosystem that I want, especially if you believe that more and more employees will be, well, let's just say not employees,
Mm,
right? They will show up as a gig worker or a consultant or contractor, which means like they have some degree of agency over the tooling that they are using within policy driven reason, right? They're bringing their own kit. They're being measured on outcome. So, like, I want to use the tools that I want, or even that employees who are switching roles, full time role to full time role, I think are going to be asking more and more questions about tech stack, even than they were before, which again is a, a check in the box for the fully remote companies, because they tend to be much more transparent about those things in public kind of career and handbook material, Like, this is exactly our marketing tech stack if you're coming into marketing. And if you don't like one of these tools, like we're totally relying on HubSpot or something, and you don't like HubSpot for whatever reason, you prefer the competitor. Don't come here.
Mhm, mhm,
Like, you're gonna have a bad experience from the jump. So we're gonna be
mhm.
transparent about things that we allow and that we use. And yeah, if you told me I was taking a job tomorrow where I got there and they said, like in my case, like, no, we don't like Claude, I'd have a fit immediately.
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
if so, yeah, I think people will lean more consumer oriented than even before with ways that they want to engage with the environment digitally for their own experience.
Compelling, highly compelling.
I
Okay.
hope so.
To conclude, Phil, right? If we accept that, employee experience is now cutting violently across HR, IT, facilities, operations, the business itself, what should the operating model for employee experience look like? Or another, what I mean to ask, in fact, is who should own it? And maybe the answer is a question again of silos. Not just in who's being managed, but who's managing it. We had HR, we had IT.
Yeah, I tend to invoke the construct of a chief of work or something like it in a lot of my writing, which is the version of that independent function. And I am not precious about the name. I'm not even precious about where it reports. And I certainly don't believe that it necessarily has to be a C-suite function from day one. I also don't believe that it is practical to aggregate the operational implementation of HRIT, real estate, everybody, like, in one place. They may meet at some executive level someday, or maybe you believe they're going to break apart the run the bank and change the bank, or run the business, change the business groups. But the I think organizations need a little bit of a human chief operating officer, or more of a like a Fitbit or a fitness tracker for the organization, right?
Mhm.
Like, I could look at my watch, or my watch might say, "Oh, you took so many steps, or you did this, or you slept better, or you didn't." And I still have agency to choose, what do I do today based on what you're telling me happened yesterday. But if I'm running a team and we're supposed to go really fast, I want to be able to turn to one source, and maybe even through my little, team co-pilot, just go, hey, what what am I not seeing that could be helpful to us? And to be able to have some central source with, let's just call it, workplace strategy and change people, by which I mean more like real estate types, uh, digital collaboration or digital workplace strategy and architecture types, not just the one who's like running Slack, but the person who spends a good amount of time thinking about how are the employees using Slack, right? What are they going to it for? How are they behaving in it? Are they making the most of the features? What does that do to team dynamics? How does that connect to meeting culture, et cetera, et cetera? And the people from the HR side who think about people listening, engaged in surveys, and maybe benefit design. All them, they all think about work in a really human centered way, and all probably want a level of data science or business intelligence and user experience research and human centered they all want that. So if you put them into one place and you just at least get them out of those big core employee experience owning functions, so that they don't feel any fear to say, oh, in this particular case, Bob, for your team, your objectives, your dynamics, your composition, your everything, it seems that the choices that you're making around, let's say, the built environment, where you go or how you sit when you're there, is hurting you. And that doesn't mean that for everyone else that judgment is true. It means for you, your choices right now are working against your objectives. So here's an unbiased view of some maybe tweaks you can make, or here's another group kind of like you, looks and feels and smells a bit like your team. They do something different, but composition wise, they're similar, and they're behaving in a different way. They're using Copilot differently. They're thinking about space differently. They have more or fewer meetings than you do, and they run them this way. Here's what we can see. It's like we're reading the tea leaves, and they may have some lessons that are useful for you. Here's some things that you might try tomorrow and see if that helps. Right? We can tell you, did your heart rate go up or down? We can tell. We don't own the outcome. You own your outcome. We own the ability to connect choices and journeys and moments and rhythms to your dependent outcome.
Amazing stuff, Phil. You typically, nowadays you just you don't even send anyone anywhere. They just go to LinkedIn or something. But you have a beautiful website, a beautiful
Oh, thank
blog,
you. I mean, the home for
which
my
we
newsletter.
read
Yes.
here on the Tech Show. We
I
read
really
the good
appreciate
stuff.
that. Yes. For
Yeah,
anybody
yeah,
else, it's walktheworkline.com. That will get you to my newsletter and everything else about me. But LinkedIn too. I'm very active there.
It's well worth checking out on the regular, and we've loved having you back, and we hope to have you back again. I wonder if the next 2 years will be as tumultuous as the last two since we last spoke, Phil.
I try. I mean, I try to be optimistic. I think the change will be even faster, but we can either pretend it's not happening and hold on to the way things were, or just try to get on with it and figure out how do we adopt to what's possible now and tackle the really difficult problems. So, like, given the choice of sitting here and stewing, or at least attempting to be optimistic about it, I choose the latter. So I hope others do too.
I guess we better. Yeah, as well said.
I think we better. Yes.
That's it for this week's DEX Show. We'll be back next week. And if you don't already, be sure to follow the show so you don't miss an episode. Until next time.